Our region, southeast Queensland, is changing and growing. To get the best outcomes from that, we need to plan for our future. The Queensland Government, in collaboration with the councils in the region, is reviewing the Southeast Queensland Regional Plan. As part of that program, we're tapping into expertise from around Australia and across the world. I'm delighted to have with me today Mitchell Silver, the Parks Commissioner at New York City and former President of the American Planning Association. So Mitch, I know throughout your career in the US and the work you've done with the American Planning Association that you've had a lot of time to think and experience the implications of generational change in our population. I just wondered whether you might be able to share with us some of your learnings and observations about that and what that might mean for the future of regions like Southeast Queensland.
Well, what it found in the United States is most people did not realize that we have 6 living generations. The greatest generation, silent generation, boomer, X, Y, and Z. And people didn't realize that each one of these generations have very specific profiles and lifestyle choices. And so their values, needs, and aspirations will drive how we're going to plan for communities in the future. They want different things. And we found that when we were going to communities and plan, the older generations were somewhat risk averse and would be very quick to say no to any sort of change. But they would come to most of our public meetings and they would just dominate and say no. And so we had to find a way of really reaching out to the younger population. And so they didn't go to public meetings, and we had to find creative ways of getting them to contribute, because in most cities, more than 60%, in some cases 70% of a population in the city is Generation X, Y, and Z, but their voices weren't being heard. I remember when I was in Raleigh, North Carolina, for example, and we would go to public meetings, and all we heard was no, no, no about change. Yet when we went out to the younger generation, we heard yes, yes, yes. And so the council started to really rethink how we want to plan for the future. More density, more lifestyle changes in terms of having more transit options, walkable communities. But for the older generation, they were used to the suburban lifestyle, to driving everywhere they would go. And so we knew that we had 2 different values that were clashing against one another. And we're seeing that across the whole United States. There's this clash of values between the older generation and the younger generation, but now they realize that as we go to the future, we have to provide more options as we grow as a country. So we started changing the way we planned. Now we use more social media to reach out to the younger generation. We now put the 2 generations together so they understand exactly what their expectations and values are in the future. And we see that not just in the United States, but really across the country. So it is something that is a game changer in our country, as the younger generations looking for a new lifestyle. They prefer cities, walkable communities, transit options, and some of them don't even want to own a car. These really have huge implications for our cities.
You touched on there the Gen Y, if you like, or the millennials and the baby boomers. So like most places in the Western world, we have big concentrations of our populations in those 2 generations in particular. The baby boomers are all heading into retirement and in some cases aged care. Our regional plan is looking at a 50-year time frame. So even in 20 or 30 years, the baby boomers will essentially be retired.
Yes.
And the millennial generation will be, in their sort of, positions of influence.
Well, first, let me say about millennials and Gen Y that we have not seen a generation like this in probably 50 years. This is now a purpose-filled generation. We've seen Gen Y or millennials volunteer at record levels on one condition: it has to have a purpose. If there's no purpose, they'll walk. They now are environmentally conscious. They understand how important it is to take care of our environment. They embrace the issues of climate change. For them, place matters. They'd rather move to a city without having a job because they want to have an experience of a place. So it is going to be a game changer as the Gen Y generation, millennials, start to move into leadership. For them, they're not consumers of goods, they're consumers of experience. Place matters, and as a result, they're moving to those places where they have that experience that they can really thrive as young professionals.
And there's a couple of aspects I might tease out a little bit there too. There's a housing imperative, isn't there? I guess particularly as we have record levels of ageing, right. The baby boomers aging. But there's also the quality of our places is actually an economic investment as well as a social investment.
It is.
Would that be true?
It is, but the bigger phenomenon, at least in the U.S., is that we're seeing household sizes shrink, and by 2030, the predominant household in the United States will be a single person. Not a family, but a single person. And so we see huge implications to the type of housing we're going to build in the future. They prefer now to have smaller units in more compact locations. And so the big concern in the U.S. is who is going to buy these single-family homes, since the home is for a family, and there's now going to be a rise in single-person households. So we're seeing more and more young people moving to cities, moving to compact places, yet the market is still building suburban homes in suburban locations. So there's this big disconnect between the future market of millennials, single, or looking for a smaller unit, and what's on the market, which is single-family homes. So we're trying to address that right now in the U.S., but we predict by 2030 there'll be close to 30 million single-family homes on the market with nobody to buy them, because a single person is not going to want to drive 20, 30, 40 kilometers outside the city center to find a home.
And are there some particular ways that manifests itself in good policy for our communities? Is it to do with a mixture of housing, or is it more parks, or are there a few sort of simple learnings we can take out of that?
Well, in terms of capital improvement, one, we could easily look at where we're spending money by community and use that as a measure. Money or the resources you dedicate is the easiest way to find. But each community may need different resources, so as we look at our capital budget and determine how we're going to spend money in that community, we determine what's most needed in that community, and then we provide those resources. In some places it could be schools, in some places it could be parks, and in some places it could be other amenities to fix the public realm and transportation. So it ranges the gamut, but when you start looking at the money you're spending and to see if you're distributing those funds equitably, that is the best measure.
Another aspect of your career I'd like to touch on that you mentioned earlier, your work in Raleigh in North Carolina. Raleigh's a local government in a region of about the size of our region in population terms. It's a Sunbelt city. I'm sure there are some parallels with your experiences there that we might be able to learn from here.
When I came to Raleigh, it was a city that really wanted to become a world-class city. But when I started holding public meetings, the older generation was just saying no to change. They enjoyed the status quo. And when I would hold a public meeting, it was just the older generation saying no, no, no. And when you say no to something, you're saying yes to something else. And I told them, you're saying no, you're saying young people, we don't want you to thrive in our community. That's not what they wanted to hear. So I had to figure out a way of reaching out to the young people. We tried very different creative ideas. One, we certainly started to reach out to the bloggers and share the message about what we're doing, but then we started holding meetings in bars and taverns. And I can remember one day we held a meeting, this one guy came up to me saying, "This is so cool, I can't believe the playing director is in a bar holding a public meeting." But that sent a message that we really were committed to listening to the young generation. In Raleigh, 30% of our population was 60 and above, but the majority of the population were under 50, yet their voices weren't being heard. And as we reached out to these young voices and invited them to the bar and tavern and met with the bloggers to share our message, it was a game changer for our community.
How did that manifest itself in policy then? I mean, what was different? What were the changes?
Well, how the change, number one, people just wanted to see single-family home development. They did not want to see density. They did not want to see high-rise. They didn't want to even see investment in our CBD and our other downtown locations. They just felt it was a waste of money because their lifestyle was about single-family homes in the suburbs. So that was a game change because the younger generation wanted those vibrant places to experience, and they didn't want to own a home. They wanted to live downtown. So for Raleigh, it was a big turning point because prior to that, 60% of all new development was single-family homes. By the time I left, 70% were apartments and density. So within a 10-year period, it totally altered the whole trajectory of the city, and now is one of the most hottest destinations for both businesses and young people to move to in the United States.
And is Raleigh a different place now to when you first started working there?
It is a very different place. It's now known as one of the best places to live and move, and it continues to be one of the fastest growing regions in the United States.
Well, Mitch, it's been an absolute pleasure, as always, to talk to you, and thanks so much for contributing to our program with the Regional Plan, Mitch.
Thank you, Greg.
Cheers.